On Christmas Eve, my daughter-in-law decorated the table with funeral candles and a sign, "The Last Supper of Anna." I was sitting right there. "We just wanted to get used to the idea," she said. The next day, I served divorce papers to her and my son. But let me start from the beginning, because what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. I drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook on Christmas Eve, the radio playing soft carols as snow began to dust the windshield of my old Honda. At 67, I still loved Christmas Eve more than any other night of the year. There was something magical about the anticipation, the way the whole world seemed to hold its breath before the big day. Michael had called me that morning, his voice carrying that familiar strain I'd been hearing more often lately. "Mom, Sarah wants to do something special for dinner tonight. She's been planning it for weeks." I should have heard the warning in his tone.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
But I was just happy to be included. Since my husband Robert died 3 years ago, family gatherings had become less frequent, and I treasured each invitation. I pulled into their driveway, noting how perfectly Sarah had decorated the front of their colonial house. White lights outlined every window and door frame, and a massive wreath hung on the front door. Sarah had always been particular about appearances. Everything had to look perfect from the outside. I carried the gifts I'd wrapped for my 2 grandchildren, Emma and little Bobby, feeling that familiar flutter of excitement. Emma was 8 now, old enough to really understand Christmas magic, and Bobby had just turned 5. I'd spent weeks knitting scarves for both of them, choosing colors I knew they'd love. Sarah answered the door before I could even knock. She looked stunning as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite spending the day cooking. Her smile seemed brighter than usual, almost excited, which surprised me. Sarah had never been particularly warm toward me, though she maintained a polite distance that I'd learned to accept. "Anna, you're right on time," she said, taking my coat. "We have such a special evening planned." Michael appeared in the hallway, and I noticed he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a quick hug that felt stiff and obligatory. "The kids are in the living room if you want to say hello." I found Emma and Bobby sprawled on the carpet, building an elaborate Lego castle. They looked up when I entered, and my heart swelled with love for these beautiful children. "Grandma Anna!" Bobby launched himself at me, and I caught him in a hug that made everything else fade away for a moment. "Merry Christmas Eve, my sweet boy," I whispered into his hair. "Are you excited for tomorrow?" "Daddy said Santa might not come this year," Emma said quietly, not looking up from her Legos. "He said Santa only visits houses where everyone is, where everyone belongs." A chill ran down my spine, but before I could ask what she meant, Sarah called from the dining room. "Anna, dinner's ready. Come see what I've prepared." I walked into the dining room and stopped cold. The table was set beautifully, but something was terribly wrong. Black candles flickered in silver holders, casting eerie shadows across the white tablecloth. In the center of the table, where a Christmas centerpiece should have been, sat a funeral spray of white lilies and baby's breath, and there, propped against the flowers like a place card, was a small black sign with white lettering, "The Last Supper of Anna." My legs felt weak. I stared at the sign, reading it again and again, certain I must be misunderstanding. The black candles, the funeral flowers, the ominous message. It was like walking into my own wake. "What is this?" I managed to whisper. Sarah appeared beside me, her smile never wavering. "We just wanted to get used to the idea," she said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. "You know, prepare ourselves emotionally for what's coming." What's coming? My voice sounded strange and distant in my own ears. Michael emerged from the kitchen carrying a roasted turkey, but even that seemed wrong somehow. He set it on the table without looking at me. "Mom, sit down. Let's just have a nice dinner." "A nice dinner?" I gestured at the macabre table setting. "With funeral candles and a sign announcing my death?" "It's not about your death," Sarah said, her tone becoming slightly sharper. "It's about accepting reality. You're 67, Anna. You're alone. It's time to start making practical decisions about your future." I sank into the chair they'd designated for me, which I now realized was positioned at the head of the table like the guest of honor at my own memorial service. The children had been seated in the kitchen at their small table, too far away to hear our conversation, but close enough for occasional glimpses of their confused faces. "What kind of practical decisions?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Sarah began serving the turkey with mechanical precision. "Well, for starters, that big house of yours. It's far too much for one person to handle. The maintenance, the utilities, the isolation. We've been researching some lovely assisted living communities." "Assisted living?" I repeated. "I live independently. I drive, I cook, I garden. I don't need assistance with anything." "Not yet," Michael said quietly, finally meeting my eyes. "But Sarah's right about the house, Mom. It's too big, and you're getting older. What if something happens? What if you fall or have a medical emergency and no one's around?" I looked at my son. This man I'd raised from a baby, who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and beg me to read just one more story. "So your solution is to plan my funeral while I'm still alive?" "It's not a funeral," Sarah said irritably. "It's an acknowledgement. A way to help all of us process the natural order of things. Parents age, children take over responsibilities. It's healthy to face these transitions instead of pretending they're not happening." I looked around the table at the black candles, the funeral flowers, the sign bearing my name like a gravestone marker. This wasn't healthy. This was something else entirely. Something that made my skin crawl and my heart race with a fear I couldn't quite name. "Where did you even get these ideas?" I asked. Sarah's smile returned, and there was something triumphant in it that made my stomach turn. "I've been reading about family dynamics and end-of-life planning. There are techniques for helping elderly family members accept their changing circumstances with dignity." Dignity? The word came out louder than I intended. "You think there's dignity in terrorizing someone with mock funeral arrangements?" "No one's terrorizing anyone," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sarah put a lot of thought into this dinner. She wanted to create a space where we could have honest conversations about the future." I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "I need some air." I walked out onto their back deck, gulping in the cold December air. Snow was falling steadily now, covering their perfectly manicured yard in a blanket of white. Through the window, I could see Sarah and Michael talking in low, urgent voices. Sarah's hands moved expressively as she made some point, and Michael nodded along like a bobblehead doll. How had this happened? How had my sweet son, the boy who used to defend injured birds and cry over sad movies, become someone who would sit quietly while his wife staged my symbolic death? After a few minutes, Michael joined me on the deck. "Mom, come back inside. Your food's getting cold." "I'm not hungry anymore," he sighed, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Look, I know this seems weird, but Sarah has a point about planning ahead. Dad never made any plans, and when he had his heart attack, we were all scrambling. The hospital decisions, the funeral arrangements, the estate stuff. It was chaos. Your father was 58 when he died. Michael, that was unexpected. I'm a healthy 67-year-old woman. There's a difference." "Is there, though?" His words cut through me like ice. "How do we really know you're healthy? When was your last physical? When did you last have your heart checked, or your cholesterol, or a mammogram?" I stared at him. "I had a complete physical in September. Dr. Martinez said I have the blood pressure of a 40-year-old and the bone density of someone 20 years younger. I bike 10 miles a week and grow half my own vegetables. What exactly about my health concerns you?" Michael looked uncomfortable. Sarah thinks what? That maybe you're not being completely honest about how you're feeling, physically or emotionally. She's noticed things." "What things?" "Forgetfulness, confusion. Last month when we called, you couldn't remember what day it was." I remembered that call. It had been a Saturday morning, and I'd been deep in a book when the phone rang. It had taken me a moment to orient myself, to remember what day it was. It happens to everyone occasionally, but apparently Sarah had cataloged it as evidence of cognitive decline. One moment of disorientation doesn't equal dementia, Michael. "No, but it's a pattern. Sarah's been keeping track." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had been keeping track. Documenting my supposed decline, building a case for my incompetence. The funeral dinner wasn't just macabre theater. It was part of a larger campaign. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time saw a stranger. "I'm going home." "Mom, don't leave like this. We haven't even had dessert. Sarah made your favorite apple pie." "Tell Sarah to save it for my actual funeral." I walked back through the house, gathering my coat and purse while Sarah watched me with that same bright smile. "Leaving so soon? But we haven't finished our conversation about your future." "My future is none of your business," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "Actually," Sarah said, her tone becoming cooler, "as your next of kin and the people who'll be responsible for you when you can no longer care for yourself, it very much is our business." I paused at the front door. "I can care for myself just fine." "For now," she said. "But time has a way of changing things, doesn't it? And when it does, we'll be ready." I drove home through the snow, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The Christmas carols on the radio sounded mocking now, cheerful voices singing about peace and joy while my world crumbled around me. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I was crying so hard I could barely see. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at my house. It was a modest 2-bedroom ranch that Robert and I had bought 30 years ago. We'd painted every room together, planted every tree in the yard, fixed every squeaky hinge and loose board. It wasn't too big for me. It was home. But as I looked at it through Sarah's eyes, I could see how it might appear to someone determined to find fault. The front steps needed repainting. The gutters should probably be cleaned. The lawn could use more regular maintenance now that I did it myself, instead of hiring the neighbor boy who'd gone off to college. Were these signs of decline, or just the natural wear and tear of life? When had maintaining my own home become evidence that I couldn't maintain my own home? Inside, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in Robert's old recliner, trying to process what had just happened. The house felt emptier than usual, and for the first time in 3 years, I wondered if maybe I was too isolated. Maybe Sarah was right about that part, at least. But the funeral candles, the death flowers, the sign with my name on it, that wasn't about practical planning. That was about something else entirely, something that felt like cruelty dressed up as concern. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom, please don't be upset. Sarah just wants what's best for everyone. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without responding. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, a day that should be filled with love and laughter and family traditions. Instead, I would be wondering if my own son was counting down the days until my death. I woke up on Christmas morning feeling like I'd aged 10 years overnight. The house was too quiet, too empty. For the first time in my life, I dreaded Christmas Day. Normally, I would have been at Michael's house by 10 in the morning, helping Sarah with the turkey while the children opened their presents. We'd established this tradition 3 years ago, after Robert died, when being alone on Christmas became unbearable. But after last night's macabre dinner theater, I couldn't bring myself to face them again so soon. Instead, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of wrapped gifts I'd planned to bring over, the scarves I'd knitted for Emma and Bobby, a cookbook I'd found for Sarah, and a book about woodworking for Michael, all sitting there like accusations of my own foolishness. How had I spent weeks preparing for a Christmas celebration with people who were apparently planning my departure from their lives? My phone rang at 9:30, Michael's name appeared on the screen, and I almost didn't answer. "Mom, are you coming over? The kids keep asking where Grandma Anna is." "I don't think that's a good idea today, Michael." "Come on, don't let last night ruin Christmas." Sarah feels terrible about how everything came across. She wants to apologize. I doubted that very much, but I didn't say so. "I need some time to think." "Think about what?" "Mom, you're being dramatic. It was just dinner conversation about planning ahead. Lots of families have these discussions. Do lots of families decorate their tables with funeral flowers and death announcements?" Silence on the other end. Then, "When you put it like that, it does sound bad. But Sarah's intentions were good. She's just very direct about difficult topics." Direct. That was one way to put it. "I'll call you later," I said and hung up before he could argue further. I spent the morning in my garden, even though it was December and most everything was dormant. There's something therapeutic about working with soil, even frozen soil. I was deadheading the last of the winter roses when I noticed something that made me stop cold. Michael's car was in my driveway. I hadn't heard him arrive, which meant he'd been sitting there for a while, probably working up the courage to come to the door. Through my living room window, I could see him hunched over his phone, typing rapidly. Instead of going inside to confront him, I stayed in the garden and watched. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed with a text, then another, then a third. Curious despite myself, I pulled out my phone to read them. The first message was from Michael. "Mom, I'm in your driveway. Can we please talk?" The second was also from Michael, sent 30 seconds later. "Sarah wants me to ask about your will. She's worried you haven't updated it since Dad died." But it was the third message that made my blood freeze. It wasn't meant for me at all. Michael had accidentally sent it to me instead of Sarah. "She's being stubborn about coming over. How long do you want me to wait before we move to phase 2? Phase 2. I stood in my garden, staring at those words while snow began to fall around me. Phase 2 of what? And what had been phase 1? The funeral dinner? My hands were shaking as I screenshot the message. Some instinct telling me I'd need evidence of what was happening. Then I walked to my living room window where Michael could see me and held up my phone, showing him his own message on the screen. Even from a distance, I could see his face go pale. He typed frantically on his phone, and seconds later I received, "Mom, that wasn't what it sounds like. Please let me explain." I walked to my front door and opened it, but didn't invite him in. "Explain what? Exactly?" Michael climbed out of his car and approached slowly, like someone trying not to spook a wild animal. "That message? It's not what you think. What I think is that you and Sarah have some kind of plan involving me, and last night was just the beginning." "What's phase 2, Michael?" "It's not a plan against you. It's a plan for you. To help you." "Help me what? Die faster? Mom, please." He was close enough now that I could see the dark circles under his eyes. "Can I come in? It's freezing out here, and this conversation is too important for the neighbors to overhear." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him enter. He sat on my couch, the same couch where he used to build blanket forts as a child, and I remained standing by the door, ready to escape if necessary. "Sarah thinks you're in denial about getting older," he began. "She thinks you need a reality check before you make decisions that could hurt you or put you in danger." "Such as?" "Living alone in this house, driving at night, managing your finances without help. She's worried you'll fall or have an accident and no one will find you for days." I studied my son's face, looking for the boy I'd raised somewhere behind this stranger's features. "And the funeral dinner was supposed to accomplish what exactly?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Sarah called it exposure therapy, like how they treat phobias by gradually exposing people to what they're afraid of. She thought if we could help you process the idea of mortality, you'd be more open to making practical changes. Practical changes like assisted living, like having support systems in place. Safety nets. And phase 2? He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, "We've scheduled a consultation with a geriatric care manager for tomorrow, someone who specializes in helping families navigate these transitions." Without asking me. "We didn't want you to say no before hearing what they had to offer." I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, mainly to have something to do with my hands. My mind was racing, trying to understand how my relationship with my only child had deteriorated to this point without my noticing. "Michael," I said finally, "do you remember when you were 8 years old and you wanted a dog?" He looked confused by the change of subject. "Yeah, of course. You and Dad said I had to prove I was responsible first. Do you remember what we made you do? I had to take care of Mrs. Chen's dog for a month while she was visiting her sister. Feed him, walk him, clean up after him. And at the end of the month, how did we decide whether you were ready for a dog of your own?" Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You asked me. You asked if I still wanted one, if I thought I could handle the responsibility. We didn't make the decision for you. We gave you information and experience, and then we trusted you to make the right choice. That's what loving families do, Michael. They trust each other to make their own decisions. This is different. You're not 8 years old. No, I'm 67, which means I have 60 years of experience making my own decisions, good ones and bad ones, but my own. Michael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Mom, what if your judgment isn't as good as it used to be? What if you can't see the risks that we can see? Then you talk to me about your concerns. You don't stage elaborate psychological interventions designed to scare me into compliance. We tried talking to you. Remember last month when Sarah suggested you might want to consider a medical alert system? You shut down the conversation completely. I did remember that conversation. Sarah had brought it up during a casual dinner, presenting it as a wonderful new technology that could give me peace of mind. But the way she'd described it, a pendant that would summon help if I fell or had an emergency, had made me feel like she was already planning for my incapacity. I shut down the conversation because it felt premature. I'm healthy, Michael. I don't fall. I don't have medical emergencies. Not yet. But Sarah has a background in healthcare, and she knows the warning signs. She's trying to help you plan ahead instead of waiting for a crisis. This was news to me. Sarah has a background in healthcare? She worked in a nursing home for 2 years before Emma was born. She's seen what happens when families don't plan properly. Something about this information felt important, though I couldn't immediately identify why. What nursing home? Sunset Manor. It's where she got the idea for the care manager consultation, actually. She's seen how much easier the transition is when families are proactive instead of reactive. I filed this information away for later consideration. And you support this approach? Scaring me into accepting help I don't need? Michael looked genuinely anguished. I don't know what to support anymore, Mom. Sarah makes logical arguments about safety and planning. But when I see the hurt in your eyes, I feel like I'm caught between my wife and my mother, and no matter what I do, someone's going to be angry with me. I'm not angry with you, Michael. I'm heartbroken. Why? Because somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as a person capable of making my own choices. You started seeing me as a problem to be managed. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you asked my opinion about something important in your life? When did you last call just to chat? Not because Sarah sent you on some mission. When did you last treat me like your mother instead of like a responsibility? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the conversations we hadn't had and all the distance that had grown between us without either of us noticing. I miss Dad, Michael said finally. I miss having someone else to share the worry about you. What worry? What exactly are you worried about? That something will happen to you and I won't be there. That you'll get sick or hurt and die alone like Dad did. The truth hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't really about my capacity or my safety. This was about Michael's fear, his guilt over his father's sudden death, his terror of losing another parent. Oh, sweetheart, I said, sitting down beside him for the first time since he'd arrived. Your father didn't die alone. He died at work. None of us were there. But he knew he was loved. He knew his family cared about him. He died knowing he had built a good life with people who would miss him. That's not dying alone, Michael. That's dying complete. Tears were streaming down his face now. I can't lose you too, Mom. I can't handle it. You're not going to lose me. Not anytime soon, and not in the way you're afraid of. But you are going to lose me if you keep letting Sarah treat me like an inconvenience instead of a person. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What do you want me to do? I want you to cancel the consultation tomorrow. I want you to tell Sarah that any future discussions about my living situation will include me as an equal participant, not as someone to be managed. And I want you to start visiting me because you want to, not because you're checking up on me. And if I do all that, then maybe we can find our way back to being a family instead of a case study. Michael nodded slowly. I'll talk to Sarah. Will you? Or will you let her talk you out of it? He met my eyes for the first time that day. I'll handle it, Mom. I promise. After he left, I sat in my living room and tried to process everything that had happened. The funeral dinner, the Phase 2 plan, the revelation about Sarah's nursing home background. It all painted a picture I didn't like, but there was something else bothering me. Something I couldn't quite put my finger. Something about the timing of Sarah's concerns, the sudden urgency around my living situation, the way she'd positioned herself as an expert on my needs. I walked to my desk and pulled out my address book. If Sarah had worked at Sunset Manor, there might be people there who remembered her, people who could tell me more about this background in healthcare she was using to justify her interventions in my life. Tomorrow was December 26th. Most places would be closed for the holiday, but nursing homes never slept. Someone would be there, and maybe someone would remember Sarah. It was time to do some investigating of my own. The morning of December 26th brought a clarity I hadn't felt since Christmas Eve. While the rest of the world was recovering from holiday excess, I was planning my own investigation. I called Sunset Manor at 8 a.m., knowing the day shift would be settling in. A cheerful voice answered on the third ring. Sunset Manor, this is Kelly speaking. How may I help you? Hello, Kelly. My name is Anna Richardson, and I'm trying to get in touch with someone who might remember a former employee named Sarah. She would have worked there about 9 years ago before her first child was born. Oh, you'll want to speak with Mrs. Patterson, our head nurse. She's been here for 15 years and knows everyone. Hold on, let me transfer you. Mrs. Patterson had a warm, professional voice that immediately put me at ease. Yes, I remember Sarah quite well, Sarah Mitchell, though I believe her last name is different now. She married that young man she was dating. Are you a family member? I'm her mother-in-law. She's been helping us with some family healthcare decisions, and I wanted to understand more about her background. There was a pause. I see. Well, Sarah was only with us for about 18 months, not 2 years as she might have mentioned. She worked in our memory care unit. Memory care? Yes, patients with dementia and Alzheimer's. It's specialized work, requires a lot of patience and understanding. Sarah was... Well, she had strong opinions about how families should handle these situations. Something in Mrs. Patterson's tone made me sit up straighter. What kind of opinions? Oh, I probably shouldn't say. It was a long time ago, and I don't want to speak out of turn. Mrs. Patterson, I'm asking because Sarah has been suggesting that I might benefit from some kind of care management, and I'm trying to understand her perspective. Another pause, longer this time. Well, I suppose there's no harm in sharing what I observed professionally. Sarah had very definite ideas about family denial. She felt that many families kept their loved ones at home too long, refusing to acknowledge declining capabilities. She was quite passionate about what she called reality intervention. My blood went cold. Reality intervention? Yes. She believed that sometimes families needed to be shown the potential consequences of their decisions in rather direct ways. She felt that gentle suggestions often fell on deaf ears. Can you give me an example? Mrs. Patterson hesitated. There was an incident with the Morrison family. Their mother was in early-stage dementia, still quite functional, but Sarah felt the family was in denial about her condition. She arranged for Mrs. Morrison to attend what she called a care planning meeting that turned out to be more of a presentation about end-stage dementia. The family was quite upset. Mrs. Morrison became very distressed. I felt sick. What happened? The family filed a complaint. Sarah's employment was terminated shortly after. She claimed she was trying to help them plan ahead, but the administration felt her methods were unnecessarily traumatic. Did she ever work in healthcare again? Not that I know of. I heard she focused on raising her family after that. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and hung up, my hand shaking. Sarah hadn't just worked in healthcare. She'd been fired from healthcare for traumatizing elderly patients and their families. And now she was using the same reality intervention tactics on me. The funeral dinner suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't about helping me accept aging gracefully. It was about shocking me into compliance with her plans for my future. I needed to know more. I spent the next hour online, researching care management services in our area. Most seemed legitimate, focused on helping families navigate complex medical and social services. But there were warnings, too, about unscrupulous operators who preyed on families in crisis, charging enormous fees for services that weren't needed. My phone rang, interrupting my research. Michael's name appeared on the screen. "Mom, I talked to Sarah about canceling the consultation today, and she's upset. She thinks you're making a mistake, that you're letting pride interfere with practical planning. What do you think?" A long pause. "I think I need to hear what the care manager has to say before making any decisions. Sarah scheduled it for this afternoon, and I think we should keep the appointment, just to get information." My heart sank. "Michael, I told you I didn't want to participate in any consultations I hadn't agreed to." "I know, but what's the harm in listening? If the person has good ideas, we can consider them. If not, we'll politely decline and move on." I could hear Sarah's influence in every word. She'd convinced him that gathering information was harmless, that I was being unreasonable by refusing to listen to expert advice. "Where is this consultation taking place?" "At our house. Sarah thought you'd be more comfortable in a familiar setting. I'd be more comfortable in my own home, but I wasn't consulted about that either." "Mom, please, just come over at 2 o'clock. Meet with this person for an hour. If you hate everything they say, you can leave." I almost said no. Every instinct told me this was another manipulation, another step in Sarah's campaign to control my life. But I also needed to know what I was dealing with. If I was going to fight back, I needed to understand their strategy. "Fine, 1 hour. But Michael, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "I want you to really listen to what this person says, not just to their recommendations, but to their assumptions about me. Pay attention to whether they're treating me like a person with agency or like a problem to be solved." "I promise." At 2 o'clock, I drove to Michael's house with a small recording device in my purse. I'd bought it years ago for recording Robert's doctor visits when his memory started getting fuzzy, and I'd never thought I'd need it for my own protection. The care manager was a woman named Janet Walsh, probably in her 50s, with gray hair and a kind smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had a briefcase full of brochures and a tablet for taking notes. "Mrs. Richardson, it's so nice to meet you," she said, shaking my hand. "Sarah has told me so much about your situation." "My situation?" "Your recent changes in cognitive function and the family's concerns about your safety living alone." I looked sharply at Sarah, who was arranging coffee cups with unnecessary attention to detail. "I haven't had any changes in cognitive function." Janet consulted her tablet. "Sarah mentioned some episodes of confusion, memory lapses, difficulty with routine tasks." "Such as?" "Not remembering what day it was during a phone call, forgetting to pay bills on time, getting lost while driving to familiar places." Each accusation hit me like a slap. The phone call confusion had happened once, when I'd been deeply absorbed in a book. I had never forgotten to pay bills or gotten lost driving. "These incidents never happened," I said clearly. Janet looked uncomfortable, glancing between Sarah and me. "Families often have different perceptions of these episodes. Sometimes the person experiencing cognitive changes isn't aware of them. And sometimes," I said, "people exaggerate or fabricate concerns to justify interventions that aren't needed." Sarah's smile became strained. "Anna, we're all here because we care about you. Janet is just trying to understand the situation so she can make appropriate recommendations. Based on false information." Janet cleared her throat. "Why don't we start with a simple cognitive assessment? I have some standard questions that can help clarify things." For the next 20 minutes, Janet asked me questions about dates, current events, mathematical problems, and memory tasks. I answered everything correctly, and I could see her growing confusion as my responses contradicted whatever Sarah had told her about my supposed decline. "Well," Janet said finally, "you're clearly functioning at a high level cognitively. Perhaps the family's concerns are more about physical safety and social isolation. I'm in excellent physical health, and I have an active social life," I said. "I volunteer at the library twice a week. I'm in a book club, and I have coffee with friends regularly." Janet looked at her notes, then at Sarah. "Perhaps we should discuss preventive planning rather than immediate intervention." But Sarah wasn't giving up easily. "Janet, We discussed on the phone that Anna might not be the best judge of her own capabilities. That's part of the problem with aging. People lose insight into their declining abilities. I'm sitting right here, I said. You can speak directly to me instead of about me. Of course, Janet said quickly. Mrs. Richardson, are there any areas where you feel you might benefit from additional support? None, but I am concerned about my family's sudden obsession with my supposed incompetence. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mom, we just want to make sure you're safe. Safe from what? I've lived independently for 67 years. I've raised children, maintained a household, held jobs, cared for aging parents, and nursed a dying husband. What exactly do you think I'm incapable of handling? Janet was clearly recognizing that she'd been called in under false pretenses. Perhaps this consultation was premature. Mrs. Richardson appears to be functioning independently without any concerning deficits. Sarah's face flushed. She's putting on a performance. This is exactly what I was talking about. The denial, the defensiveness. She's not going to admit problems in front of strangers. I'm not admitting problems because I don't have problems, I said. The only problem I see is a daughter-in-law who seems determined to convince everyone that I'm incompetent. That's not true. I care about your well-being. Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you care about controlling my life. Janet began packing up her materials. I think this family might benefit from counseling rather than care management services. There seem to be some communication issues that should be addressed. Wait, Sarah said. You haven't discussed the housing options yet, or the financial planning services. Mrs. Richardson doesn't appear to need housing alternatives or financial assistance at this time, Janet said diplomatically. After Janet left, the three of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Michael spoke. Mom, I owe you an apology. You were right. That felt more like an ambush than an information gathering session. Thank you for saying that. Sarah stood abruptly. I can't believe you're both willing to ignore the warning signs just because Anna can perform well for an hour in front of a stranger. What warning signs? Michael asked. Janet didn't find any evidence of cognitive decline because Anna was on her best behavior. This is classic denial behavior. Families refuse to see what's right in front of them until it's too late. I reached into my purse and pulled out my recording device. Sarah, I recorded this entire conversation, including your false claims about my cognitive function and your attempts to manipulate Janet's assessment. Sarah's face went white. You recorded us without permission? In my son's house, during a meeting I didn't consent to, with a professional I didn't hire, discussing my personal business without my input. Yes, I recorded it, just like I've been documenting everything else you've done in the past few days. What do you mean? Everything else? I smiled, feeling powerful for the first time since Christmas Eve. I mean, I know about your employment history at Sunset Manor. I know about your termination for traumatizing elderly patients. I know that your healthcare background consists of 18 months before you were fired for the same behavior you're exhibiting now. Sarah looked like she might faint. Michael stared at her with dawning comprehension. Sarah, is that true? Were you fired from Sunset Manor? She rallied, lifting her chin defiantly. I was terminated because I was willing to tell families hard truths they didn't want to hear. Just like now. You were terminated, I said, for conducting unauthorized reality interventions that traumatized patients and their families. Sound familiar? Michael looked between us, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. The funeral dinner. That was one of your reality interventions. I was trying to help Anna face reality before she makes dangerous decisions. You were trying to scare me into giving up my independence, I corrected. And you almost succeeded. I stood up, gathering my purse and coat. Michael, I'm going home now. When you're ready to have a real conversation about our relationship, one that doesn't involve manipulation tactics or false healthcare emergencies, call me. But I won't participate in any more interventions, consultations, or reality therapy sessions. Is that clear? Michael nodded, still looking stunned. Crystal clear. As I walked to my car, I could hear raised voices from inside the house. Michael was finally standing up to Sarah, and it was about time. But I knew this wasn't over. Sarah had invested too much in her campaign against me to give up easily. and tomorrow was December 27th, only 4 days left before New Year's Eve, when people traditionally made resolutions for fresh starts. I had some planning of my own to do. December 27th dawned gray and cold. I'd barely slept, my mind churning over yesterday's revelations about Sarah's past and the confrontation that had finally opened Michael's eyes. But something told me Sarah wouldn't give up easily. I was proven right at 9 a.m. when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah standing on my porch, looking composed and determined. She was alone, which surprised me. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to clear the air. Yesterday got heated, and I think we both said things we didn't mean." I meant every word I said. "Anna, please, can we talk like adults? 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her enter. She walked into my living room with that same assessing gaze, as if cataloging everything that needed to be changed. "You have a lovely home," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It must be a lot of work to maintain." "It's manageable." She sat on my couch without being invited. "Anna, I owe you an apology. I should have been more upfront about my background at Sunset Manor. You should have been honest about being fired for traumatizing patients. That's not exactly what happened. There was a misunderstanding about my methods. But my intentions were always to help families prepare for difficult transitions." I remained standing. "By terrifying them? By helping them face reality, instead of living in denial." Her voice took on a lecturing tone. "Anna, I've seen what happens when families wait too long to make necessary changes. The elderly person falls, breaks a hip, ends up in the hospital, and suddenly everyone's scrambling to find emergency care. I haven't fallen. I haven't broken anything. I'm in excellent health, for now. But you're 67 years old and living alone. Statistics show that 1 in 3 adults over 65 falls each year." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "I've been doing some research on your specific situation." She opened the folder and spread several papers on my coffee table. Printouts of articles about aging, statistics about elderly accidents, and what looked like financial documents. "What is all this?" "Information about your house, your neighborhood, your lifestyle. Did you know that your property taxes have increased 30% in the last 5 years? And your homeowner's insurance went up after that storm damage to your roof last spring." I stared at her. "How do you know about my insurance?" "Public records. It's amazing what you can find online if you know where to look." She pointed to another document. "And this shows that you've had to call a plumber 3 times in the past year." Those were minor repairs. Every homeowner deals with maintenance issues. Minor repairs that cost you over $800. Money that could have been saved if you were living in a maintenance-free environment. I sat down, feeling like I was under assault. "You researched my finances, my property records. I researched your situation so I could present you with facts instead of emotional arguments." She pulled out another paper. "This is information about Sunset Gardens, a beautiful assisted living community just 20 minutes from here. They have a waiting list, but with my connections in the industry, I might be able to expedite your application." "I don't want to live in assisted living." "You don't want to live there now. But what about in 5 years, 10 years? Wouldn't it be better to get on the waiting list while you're still healthy enough to choose your preferred accommodations?" There was a logic to her argument that made it particularly insidious. She wasn't suggesting immediate action, just preparation. "What does Michael think about this research project of yours?" "Michael wants what's best for you, but he's too emotionally involved to see the situation clearly. That's why families need objective guidance." From someone who was fired for traumatizing elderly patients? Her composure cracked slightly. "I made some mistakes in my approach at Sunset Manor. I was young and perhaps too direct. But I learned from that experience." Is that what the funeral dinner was? A learning experience? That was actually Michael's idea. He wanted to find a way to start a conversation about end-of-life planning, and I suggested making it memorable. This was news to me. Michael suggested the funeral theme? "He's been worried about you for months, Anna. He sees the same warning signs I do." I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. "What warning signs?" Sarah consulted another paper. Forgetting phone conversations, repeating stories, asking the same questions multiple times. Last month when we visited, you served us coffee in cups that hadn't been properly washed. That's not true. The lipstick stains were still visible on the rim of my cup. I didn't want to embarrass you by mentioning it. I tried to remember that visit, but it was just one of many casual afternoon coffees. Had I been distracted? You're lying. Why would I lie about something so trivial? Anna, these are small things individually, but together they paint a picture of someone who's starting to struggle with details. She was good. Each accusation was small enough to be believable, impossible to definitively disprove, and just concerning enough to plant seeds of doubt. What do you want from me, Sarah? I want you to consider that maybe the people who love you can see things you can't see yourself. I want you to be open to getting some help before you actually need it. Help like what? A cleaning service to start, someone to handle the yard work, maybe a medical alert system, small changes that could make a big difference in your safety and peace of mind. It all sounded so reasonable when she put it that way. But I remembered Mrs. Patterson's words about Sarah's tactics, and if I refuse, then you refuse. But Anna, I hope you'll think about what happens if something goes wrong, if you fall and can't get to the phone, if you have a medical emergency and no one finds you for days. She was painting a picture of my future death, making it vivid and frightening. Just like the funeral dinner, this was psychological manipulation dressed up as concern. I think you should leave now. Of course, I've given you a lot to think about. She gathered her papers and stood. But Anna, time isn't on your side here. The best assisted living communities have long waiting lists. After she left, I gathered up all of Sarah's papers and put them in a box with my growing collection of evidence. The recording from yesterday's consultation, the documentation of her employment history, the screenshots of Michael's mistaken text about Phase 2. My phone rang. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Mom, are you okay? Sarah said she stopped by to apologize, but she came home upset. Michael, she came here with a folder full of research about my finances and property records. She'd looked up my insurance claims and property taxes without my permission. Silence on the other end. She also told me that the funeral dinner was your idea. That's not true. I mean, I mentioned that we should talk about end-of-life planning, but the funeral theme was all Sarah. Michael, I need to ask you something. Has Sarah ever been in my house when I wasn't there? A long pause. Once. Last month when you had that doctor's appointment. She offered to water your plants while you were gone. Did I ask her to water my plants? No, she just suggested it. I remembered that day. I'd been gone for 3 hours for my annual physical. More than enough time for Sarah to thoroughly search my house, photograph anything she wanted to use against me. Michael, your wife has been systematically gathering evidence to support a case that I'm incompetent. She's been in my house without permission, researched my private financial information, and is now using psychological manipulation to try to force me into assisted living. That sounds paranoid. Mom? Does it? Or does it sound like someone finally connected the dots? Michael was quiet for a long time. Finally, what do you want me to do? I want you to pay attention. Really pay attention to how Sarah talks about me. What she suggests, how she frames every conversation about my future. And if you're right, if Sarah has been manipulating the situation, then we'll deal with it, together. But Michael, I won't tolerate any more interventions or consultations. The next time someone tries to ambush me with unwanted help, I'm going to fight back. How? I looked at the box of evidence I'd been collecting. Let's just say that 2 can play at the research game. Tomorrow was December 28th. Only 3 days until New Year's Eve, when Sarah would probably expect me to make resolutions about downsizing my life. Instead, I was going to give her a New Year's surprise she'd never forget. December 31st arrived with crisp clarity. I'd spent 3 days preparing for this moment, and I felt more determined than I had in years. The invitation had come from Sarah, of course. A New Year's Eve dinner party at their house. Just family and a few close friends. She'd called personally, her voice honey-sweet with false warmth. Anna, I know we've had our differences this week, but it's New Year's Eve, time for fresh starts and new beginnings. I'd love for you to join us. I'd accepted graciously, knowing exactly what she had planned. This would be her grand finale, her final push to convince everyone that I needed to be managed. She probably expected me to arrive defeated, ready to accept whatever arrangements she'd made for my future. She had no idea what was coming. I arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, carrying champagne and wearing my best navy dress, the same one from Christmas Eve, but this time I felt confident instead of vulnerable. The house was full of people I didn't recognize, Sarah's friends from various committees. I spotted Janet Walsh, the care manager, talking with a distinguished man in an expensive suit. "Anna, you look wonderful," Sarah greeted me with air kisses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The evening progressed predictably. Sarah seated me with the older guests, subtly positioning me as part of the elderly contingent. Conversations around me focused on retirement communities, healthcare planning, and aging parents. It was masterfully orchestrated, and I had to admire Sarah's skill even as I prepared to demolish her narrative. At 10 p.m., Sarah called for attention. "Before we count down to midnight, I wanted to share something special." Here it comes, I thought. As many of you know, we've been concerned about my mother-in-law, Anna. She's been living alone since her husband passed, and we've noticed some concerning changes. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the room. I sat perfectly still, hands folded. Tonight, I'm happy to announce that Anna has agreed to accept help. We've arranged for her to move into Sunset Gardens, where she'll have the support she needs. The room erupted in applause. People turned to smile at me encouragingly, as if I'd accomplished something wonderful by surrendering my autonomy. I stood up slowly, and the room quieted. "Thank you, Sarah, for that lovely announcement, but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Sarah's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I never agreed to move anywhere. In fact, I've learned some interesting things about you this week that everyone should hear." The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's face went pale. "Anna, this isn't the time or place for family disagreements, isn't it? You made this public, Sarah. You announced my supposed decision to strangers without my consent. I think that makes it exactly the time and place." I reached into my purse and pulled out papers. "I've been doing research of my own. Did you know Sarah was fired from her last healthcare job for traumatizing elderly patients?" Gasps echoed around the room. Janet Walsh looked like she wanted to disappear. "That's not relevant," Sarah said quickly. "That was years ago. A misunderstanding." "Was it?" "Mrs. Patterson at Sunset Manor described your reality intervention techniques in detail. You had a habit of terrifying families into making decisions based on fear." Michael stared at Sarah with growing horror. "Is that true?" "It's not what it sounds like," Sarah protested. "I was trying to help families face difficult realities, the same way you helped me, with funeral dinners and fake medical consultations." I turned to address the room. 3 days ago, Sarah arranged for a care manager to assess my mental capacity based on fabricated concerns. I pulled out my recording device and set it on the coffee table. Fortunately, I recorded the entire session. "You can't play that," Sarah said, voice rising. "That's private. You made it public when you announced my living arrangements without consent." I pressed play. Janet's voice filled the room. "Mrs. Richardson appears to be functioning independently without any concerning deficits." Then Sarah's voice, sharp with frustration. "She's putting on a performance. This is exactly what I was talking about. The denial, the defensiveness." The room fell silent except for the recording. I let it play another minute, allowing everyone to hear Sarah's attempts to convince the professional that I was incompetent despite evidence to the contrary. "That's enough," Sarah said, reaching for the device. I moved it away. "There's more. Sarah researched my private financial information without permission. She's been in my house when I wasn't there, taking photographs and searching through my belongings." "That's not true," Sarah protested weakly. "Michael, remember when Sarah watered my plants while I was at the doctor? I never asked her to do that. She volunteered so she could search my house." Michael turned to his wife. "Sarah, did you go through Mom's things?" I was concerned about her safety. Sometimes you have to investigate to protect people from poor judgment. Poor judgment like living independently at 67 while in excellent health? I asked. Or poor judgment like trusting my daughter-in-law not to violate my privacy? The distinguished man stepped forward. Mrs. Richardson, I'm David Harper, an attorney specializing in elder law. What you're describing sounds like potential guardianship fraud. Sarah's face went white. Guardianship fraud? When someone fabricates evidence of incompetence to gain control over an elderly person's affairs, it's a serious crime. No one's talking about guardianship, Sarah said quickly. Aren't you? I pulled out another paper. This is an application for emergency guardianship you filled out online 3 days ago. The room buzzed with shocked conversations. Sarah's friends stared at her with confusion and disgust. This is ridiculous, Sarah said, voice shaking. Anna is obviously having a paranoid episode. This is exactly the behavior we've been concerned about. Am I paranoid? Or am I a woman who figured out that her daughter-in-law is a predator? I turned to the room. Everything Sarah has done to me, she's done before. She has a pattern of targeting elderly people, manufacturing crises, and positioning herself as the solution. Michael stood up, face pale. Mom, are you saying Sarah planned all of this? I'm saying your wife is exactly who she was when she was fired from Sunset Manor. She never learned. She just got better at hiding her methods. Sarah made one last desperate attempt. Even if my methods were questionable, my concerns about Anna are valid. She's 67 and living alone. Something could happen. Something could happen to anyone, I replied. Should we all surrender our independence because of what might happen? The attorney stepped forward again. Mrs. Richardson, have you considered filing a restraining order? What you've described constitutes harassment. I've considered it. But first, I wanted everyone here to understand what kind of person Sarah really is. I looked around the room at Sarah's friends, the people she'd hoped would support her campaign. They were staring at her with shock and revulsion. Sarah, I said quietly, your reality intervention days are over. You will not research my information, enter my home without permission, or make announcements about my future without consent. And if I don't agree? I smiled. Then you'll find out what happens when someone messes with a woman who has nothing left to lose and 67 years of experience dealing with bullies. The countdown began on television. 10, 9, 8. Michael, I said, you have a choice. You can continue enabling your wife's abusive behavior, or you can remember that you have a mother who loves you. 7, 6, 5. But I won't tolerate any more interventions or manipulations. Sarah's campaign against me ends tonight. 4, 3, 2. Happy New Year, everyone. 1. As the room erupted in confused celebrations, I gathered my purse and coat. Sarah stood frozen, surrounded by people who now saw her for what she really was. Michael followed me to the door. Mom, I'm sorry. I had no idea how far this had gone. I know you didn't, but now you do. The question is what you're going to do about it. What do you want me to do? I want you to protect me from your wife. And if you can't do that, then stay away until you can. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I understand. As I drove home through quiet streets, fireworks exploded in the distance. For the first time in days, I felt truly hopeful. Sarah's campaign was over. Her reputation was in ruins, her methods exposed. She would never again position herself as the caring daughter-in-law helping a declining elderly woman. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I had won back my dignity, my autonomy, and my son's respect. The new year stretched ahead, full of possibilities that were entirely my own to choose. 3 months later, I sat in my sunroom with my morning coffee, watching the first crocuses push through the last of the winter snow. Spring was coming, and with it, a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in years. The phone rang, and I smiled when I saw Michael's name on the screen. Our relationship had changed dramatically since New Year's Eve, but in ways I never could have imagined. Morning, Mom. How are you feeling today? Wonderful, sweetheart. How are the kids? They're good. Emma keeps asking when she can come stay with Grandma again this weekend. This had become our new routine. After that catastrophic New Year's Eve party, Michael had made a choice that surprised everyone, including himself. He'd asked Sarah to move out. It hadn't happened immediately. For 2 weeks after the party, they'd tried counseling, but the therapist had quickly identified that Sarah's behavior patterns weren't just inappropriate. They were abusive. The funeral dinner, the privacy violations, the systematic campaign to undermine my independence, it all pointed to someone with serious control issues that went far beyond concern for an aging parent. The final straw had come when Michael discovered Sarah had been intercepting my mail during her unauthorized visits to my house. She'd been screening my correspondence, looking for medical bills or legal documents that could support her narrative of my declining competence. "I can't be married to someone who would do that to my mother," Michael had told me during one of our many long conversations in January. "And I can't let my children learn that this kind of behavior is acceptable." The divorce had been swift and decisive. Sarah had initially fought for custody, but her behavior at the New Year's Eve party, witnessed by a room full of people including an elder law attorney, had made her case untenable. The children spent most of their time with Michael, and I had become a regular part of their lives again. "Actually, Mom, there's something I wanted to talk to you about," Michael said, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "What is it?" "I've been seeing someone. Her name is Lisa, and she's nothing like Sarah. She's a social worker who specializes in family counseling, and she's been helping me understand how I got so lost in Sarah's manipulation." I felt a flutter of anxiety. After everything we'd been through, the thought of another woman entering Michael's life, and potentially mine, was daunting. "I'd like you to meet her," he continued, "but only if you're comfortable with it, and only when you're ready." "What's she like?" "She's kind, really kind. She loves that Emma and Bobby have such a close relationship with their grandmother. She says it's one of the healthiest family dynamics she's ever seen." That made me smile. "She sounds lovely." "She is. And Mom, she knows everything about what happened with Sarah." I told her the whole story, and her first question was whether you felt safe and supported. "She's not interested in changing anything about our family. She just wants to be part of it. If that's okay with everyone." Over the next few weeks, I got to know Lisa gradually. She came to Sunday dinners at my house, helped Emma with her homework, and listened to Bobby's endless stories about dinosaurs with genuine interest. Most importantly, she never tried to position herself between Michael and me. If anything, she encouraged their relationship, understanding that healthy families are built on respect and inclusion, not control and isolation. The difference between Lisa and Sarah was like night and day. Where Sarah had seen my independence as a threat, Lisa saw it as a strength. Where Sarah had looked for problems to solve, Lisa looked for connections to nurture. "I think you're remarkable," she told me one Sunday afternoon as we cleaned up after dinner. "Michael talks about how you stood up to Sarah with such pride. He says watching you fight for yourself taught him how to fight for what's right." As spring progressed, our family found its new rhythm. The children spent weekends at my house, where we planted a garden together and I taught Emma to knit. Michael and Lisa bought a house just 10 minutes away, close enough for spontaneous visits, but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. I never saw Sarah again after that New Year's Eve confrontation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to another state, probably looking for a fresh start where her reputation hadn't preceded her. I felt sorry for whatever unsuspecting family might fall victim to her next reality intervention. The most surprising development had been my friendship with David Harper, the elder law attorney who'd witnessed Sarah's downfall. He'd called a few weeks after the party to check on my well-being, and we'd discovered a shared love of gardening and classical music. Our coffee dates had become a highlight of my week. "You know," he said one afternoon as we walked through the botanical gardens, "what you did that night took tremendous courage. Most people in your situation just accept the manipulation because it's easier than fighting back." I didn't feel courageous. I felt terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of fear. You saved yourself, Anna, and probably prevented Sarah from victimizing someone else. On a warm day in May, exactly 5 months after that terrible Christmas Eve dinner, I hosted a spring barbecue in my backyard. Michael and Lisa brought the children, David brought his famous potato salad, and several of my friends from book club joined us. As I watched Emma chase bubbles across my lawn while Bobby tried to catch them, I reflected on how much had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman under siege, fighting to maintain my independence and dignity. Now I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not who they thought I should become. "Grandma!" Emma called, running up to me with grass stains on her knees and joy in her eyes. "Can you tell us the story about the princess who saved herself?" "Of course, sweetheart." As I began the familiar tale, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was living it. I was the princess who saved herself, and I'd written my own happy ending. The story I'd always told Emma was about a princess who didn't wait for rescue, who used her own strength and wisdom to overcome the forces trying to control her. But it had taken a real-life villain to teach me that I'd had that strength all along. Looking around my garden at the people I'd chosen to be my family, some by blood, some by choice, I felt a peace I'd never experienced before. This was what family should be. A group of people who supported each other's growth, celebrated each other's strengths, and created space for everyone to flourish. Sarah had tried to write me out of my own story, to reduce me to a problem that needed solving. Instead, she'd helped me discover that I was the author of my own life, and I intended to make it a beautiful one. As the sun set on that perfect spring day, I raised a glass of wine to toast the people around my table. "To new beginnings," I said, "and to families that choose love over control." "To new beginnings," they echoed, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the confidence of a woman who had learned to save herself and found a family worthy of her strength. The princess in my story had always known her own worth. It had just taken me 67 years to learn the same lesson, but as I'd discovered, it's never too late to rewrite your own fairy tale ending.